Hello, everyone, and it's been a long time since we've done a podcast. But as most of you know, we've been doing a lot of work on the front line. And when we're on the front line, that means school meetings, court cases, tribunals, and this kind of stuff we cannot possibly publicise. But for our first podcast back, we are absolutely delighted to be hosting our today's podcast with the wonderful Steve James. Steve James has his own podcast. He's much more popular than us. So thank you, Steve, for allowing us to interview you. So Steve's podcast is called The Edge of the Matrix. I do know some of our followers are already following your page, Steve, because they keep tagging us all the time. So today I'm joined by Steve and obviously again our director, Joan Ginsberg, and we're both just going to be having a chat with Steve here. So Steve, for the people who do not know, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so as you say, my name's Steve James, and I'm actually a retired firefighter. Pretty much my whole working life, I've been a public servant. So I started in the military at age 17 and did almost 10 years. Before leaving, I did a couple of years working in Civistry, a bit of security work, while I was applying to join the fire service. And I got in the fire service and spent 20 years literally serving the community. So you could say I've always, been a public servant, but now I've retired, I feel like I'm still serving the public because I saw a problem within the fire service. I saw this agenda creep into the fire service while I was in there, and I was like, "Where's this coming from? What's it got to do with us? We just go out and and help the public, in emergency situations. Why is policies coming into the fire service talking about gender identity?" And we can self-identify our gender, and that could be, and the policy wording said that could be no gender at all, non-binary. I'm like, what's all this nonsense? So I kind of like did a little bit of digging and thought, yeah, there's a serious issue here for society as a whole. Not forget, but just put aside for 1 second the harms that this can do to women, the harms that this can do to children. I didn't think about that at the time. For me, it was like, what's going on? There's some kind of top-down social engineering happening here. So, so that's how I kind of that's how it first kind of like crossed my path. Yeah.
That's really interesting because, like you said, it was policies coming into the fire service. And just to give it, and some people won't know who we are or what we do. And for the people out there who don't know, we've been fighting the RSE in schools, so the relationship with sexuality education. And with that, we're dealing with gender identity and that children are being told there's 72 genders. And I find it really interesting that these policies were coming into the fire service. I know somebody who's a female firefighter. I wouldn't want to get into a fight with her. So I do know there's a lot of women there now, but it is mostly male orientated. The fire service. So
Yeah.
for you to be getting these policies and then for you to think that there's something quite not right. Why is that not happening across the board? Why is this not happening in schools and in other social service departments and things like that? Why aren't people thinking this just doesn't seem right?
I think because it was so at the time, because it was so absurd that, and it was predominantly, like you say, male orientated in the fire service, because it was so absurd, people didn't take it seriously. And I thought it was a bit of a joke. So, and people just want to, because it's so crazy, and people just want to go into work, look after their families, put bread on put, food on the table, and don't want to be bothered with the politics of something so crazy. because I was saying to some of the firefighters, "Have you seen this?" And they just shrugged their shoulders. They didn't want to know. I almost tested the policy. I was going to say, well, I was going to physically go in the women's toilets and say I'm identifying as a woman today. But of course, I'm not a creepy bloke and I don't
Yeah.
want to make women uncomfortable. I wanted to prove a point, but it wasn't that point wasn't that important to me where it would have made some of the other females uncomfortable. And I'm not just, I mean, most fire stations used to be just all male orientated, so it wouldn't be an issue there. But I was thinking about maybe at the headquarters where sometimes you go to the headquarters where there was a lot more female staff there. I never did that, but what I actually did at the same time, we were getting surveys coming through, staff surveys, and in one of the surveys, it asked us for our gender identity, or what gender do you identify as? And I actually identified as a woman on that form because it was an anonymous form. But I think that might have backfired because I'm pretty sure that the backroom staff, when they saw that, it would have given them encouragement to say, "Oh, we have somebody who's identifying as trans, but they're too afraid to come out, so we must do more." And of
Yeah.
course, we started to have LGBTQ plus notice boards appearing on on the walls of the fire stations, and we were encouraged to be LGBTQ allies. And of course, if you put yourself forward as an ally, you could use that as evidence as to if you wanted to be promoted. To get promoted, you provide evidence of what you're doing to promote the service. And
That includes the
yeah, of
LGBTQI.
course. I mean, and the chief we've got a new chief fire officer in Greater Manchester Fire Service. I won't name him, but he's the current chief fire officer, and he wanted to be a man of the people, and he joined. When he was put into that position, he went round all the fire stations to speak to people, and he said that my main role in the fire service is to change the culture. And he was given the job by Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, and Beverly Hughes, who was the deputy mayor. And they interviewed him for the job. And his whole remit was to change the culture of the fire service. At the time, there was this idea that there was like managerial bullying, and that's what we thought he meant. But in retrospect, I know that now that he wanted to there's social engineering going on in society, and it's
Yeah.
happening in the institutions, and it was all about making them more LGBTQ, which includes the T and the Q, okay, and more, equality, diversity, and inclusion, and all that kind of thing. That was his main remit, to change the culture.
So, and the devil's in the detail. I'm here to change the culture. So let's look. They've kind of changed the culture of the police force as well.
Yeah,
So we've gone from these big, massive, burly men now. And again, when I was a teenager, I was a bit of a naughty kid.
yeah,
So I came across the police quite a lot, and there would only be. Oh, I could not even count on one hand how many female officers there were. But even the female officers back then, you wouldn't want to mess with them, and that's not me being sexist now. These women could hold their own. But what we are dealing with now, Steve, I'm only 5 foot tall. I'm
mhm,
barely, if I'm touching 7.5 stone, I'm celebrating, right? And what I'm seeing now since this change of culture is you've got women my size trying to wrestle a 6 foot man, right? So two police officers my size trying to wrestle a 6 foot man while you've got a male police officer stood behind holding the dog on the lead.
yeah,
And then it gets too much for the women. They got to let the dog go. Well, what if you had two 6 foot men? That would have been done, cuffed in the car and gone. So what is this actually doing to our services? And with the police, with the fire service as well, that is a very important job. You have to be strong. You have to be completely with it. I don't want to change the culture of the fire service because the culture of the fire service as I know it makes me confident that if I'm stuck in this house, there's going to be somebody strong enough to get me out of that
Yeah.
window. Or, and I don't mean this in a horrible way, but we do need these cultures to remain that way for the reason for our safety. This is the whole reason why we don't have lots of 4 foot women in the fire service, but we are seeing it now in the police service. And I just think it's making, well, it's a joke. It's making a joke of the system. And I also know when I was a teenager as well, like I said, I was a little bit of a handful. And if I was faced with an officer the same size as me, I would probably have got myself in trouble, I'd be like, who are you kind of thing. That it takes away the authority, takes away the power within the service then. Would you say so?
Absolutely. The operational effectiveness of the fire service has been greatly reduced because of equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I've seen that firsthand. It's no longer a meritocracy. Okay, a meritocracy. Look at sports. Okay, sports is the ultimate meritocracy. You get the best people winning, you get the best players on the best team. Okay, there's no room for equality, diversity, and inclusion
No.
in sport, and that should hold true for our emergency services. I'll quickly give you an example. As I say, they wanted to change the culture. They said it has to be, the fire service should be more representative of the community that we serve. Okay, well, really, the fire service should be operationally effective.
Yeah.
So there was a female that got through the training course. She was basically carried through the training course. She got put on station, and you're in a probationary period. When it came to her assessment for road traffic collisions, one of the things you have to do is be able to use what they call the jaws of life, big heavy cutting equipment to cut doors off cars. She couldn't cut a door off the car. They weigh about 20 kilos. They call them the jaws of life, or the cutters, the hydraulic cutters. And she couldn't cut the door off the car to gain entry. She put the cutters down and run in the back of the fire engine and started crying. She's still in the job. She's still in the job.
Listen,
So
it's look, you can blame policy in one sense for that, right? But let's look at the people. Like I said, I would not. We're looking at need and want, and I think what we're doing is we're fulfilling people's wants instead of meeting their needs. Like I always wanted to be, when I was little, funny enough, I did want to be a fireman, right? Because we didn't have fire women back and it wasn't
or
part of our vocabulary,
if can I just say something before you move on? If you use the term fireman in any interview to join the service or to get promoted, you will not get in the service and you will not be promoted if you use the term fireman. You have to use gender neutral language and say firefighter.
See, then this is another thing, but like I said, I thought I wanted to be a fireman. Not a man, but that was my vocabulary at the time. But as you get into adulthood, that would have been the most ridiculous thing for me to even attempt.
Mm.
Because what? Because I want to do something. It's not about want, it's about need.
Yeah.
We need strong, fit individuals, sound mind as well, saying, know what they're doing. That's what we need as a line of defense. This diversity, equity, and inclusion. It does not work, If somebody walked in now into our rooms here, 3 of us here, and we were handed £100 each, we've equally been given £100. That £100 means something different to us all. It means something different to us all. Our bank accounts ain't suddenly going to be the same. Our bills aren't suddenly going to be all paid. That £100 is different to us all. And it's the same if somebody give us a box to stand on. We're all given the same size box to stand on.
Yeah.
Well, the chances are I'm still going to be the shortest. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It doesn't, there is no such thing as equality. We are individuals, and we're individual for a reason. This is how we fit. Jigsaw pieces are odd and individual and they lock in. So all of this is like as if we're we're being rounded and molded into sludge because we've got no substance anymore.
Yeah, you have to recognize difference. And I think a certain wave of feminism is responsible for how it actually is. You know, a lot of the women growing up, I remember like I grew up in the era of the Spice Girls and it was all girl power and we can all do the same roles as men. Well, no, you can't. But equally, men can't do the roles that women do. We've got to embrace the fact that we are different and we all have different qualities. So I do think, you know, some of the past, you know, the feminist movement is, you know, partly responsible for that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Partly,
it's not chauvinist to say that,
no.
but a while back I would have been too afraid to say that.
No, I totally agree with you, and I'm sure Joe will have plenty to say on that as well. You know, look what the feminist movement has done. They wanted us to be equal. Now we don't even have the option to stay at home and
Yeah,
raise our children. We're being forced into work. And this, you know, there's equal opportunities for males and females. Well, how come now we need both adults in the household
yeah,
working to even attempt to
yeah,
make ends meet, you know? I was in university and they are promoting sex work as a valid
yeah,
you know, profession.
yes,
So
yeah. I think,
is that what feminism is? You know, I would
yeah.
give anything to be living on a house up on the mountain there with lots of children, lots of grandchildren, baking. I'd be happy being a domestic goddess.
There's
That's what
something
I
no,
would be
yeah,
happy doing.
yeah, it's noble to bring up a family well, but this is all when you look at the bigger picture, and I do get conspiratorial because there are conspiracies. Um, it's an attack on the family unit. You know,
Absolutely.
get both parents out to work, okay, make house prices so you know so that you need two people working to be able to afford one, and then farm your children off to state education. And then, as you know, you've seen what the state education is bringing to children while the parents are too busy working.
So, right, let's talk about what you actually do on a day-to-day basis now. We've talked about the changes within these professions that are supposed to be out there protecting us. And you know, you're supposed to have certain requirements to be able to protect someone, but we know that's all being eroded away now. Our systems are not as strong as they used to be because we're also inclusive and tolerant. So you tell us, Steve, what do you do on a day-to-day basis
What do you mean in my campaigning? Okay,
in
well
your
you can see you
campaign
can
then?
just see there that that's me with my billboards, and I go to cities and towns up and down the country, um, basically raising awareness for what I see as the harms of this gender ideology. I must point out, I'm not the first person to do this. I wasn't the original. When I was looking into this, I was looking at what other people did, and I spotted a guy from Canada called Chris Elston, otherwise known
Billboard, Chris.
as Billboard Chris. And I saw what he was doing, and I thought I could do that. So I actually contacted him. I emailed him and said, Chris, I'm going to do what you do in the UK. Have you got any advice for me? And he actually gave me four pieces of advice. He said, remain calm, know your stuff, film everything, and let them speak. And for the most part, I try and follow those four rules. Sometimes I speak too much, but most of the time, you know, when I'm composed, you know, I do remain calm and I let them speak. So I didn't want to fully copy Chris in the way he does things. I wanted to, you know, put my kind of my own touch to it. And I spent a while thinking about how I was going to go about it. And I decided, as you can see, as people will know, that flag there is the transgender flag. So I'm I'm raising awareness of the harms of what that flag's all about. So
Yeah.
I took their flag and then put a message on it, which was going against the ideology. So in that one, I don't know if you can see it from the screen. It says, "There's no such thing as a transgender child." That was a message that Chris Elston used to say all the time. So I did take one of his messages. And I've got a couple of other messages. Another one says trans women are men. I've got another one saying keep men out of women's sports. So as I say, I go up and down. I record everything as well. So I use two cameras. I don't know if you can see just above the sign there. I've got a camera on my chest, so I have that there, and I also have a
Yeah.
tripod. So I've got two cameras, um, and I basically wait for people to approach me. If I was to go and approach people, the police could use the Section 5 public order, Section 4A or Section 5 of the Public Order Act 1986, of harassment, alarm, and distress because I'm going up to people. So I just wait for people to come and challenge me on what I'm wearing, or what my message is. And if anybody's watched some of my videos, you'll know it doesn't take long for people to actually come and challenge me. I use their flag, the trans flag colours, for two reasons. One, they will see it from a distance, and so if I just had a normal sign, they may not see it. But people
Yeah.
that follow this agenda, they'll see it from a distance, so they'll come. And then I actually see in their eyes, they come smiling towards me, and then they start to read it, and the clogs are whirring in the head, and then all of a sudden it's like, what? And they want to come and speak to me. So job done. I've provoked a conversation. But also, what I can say to the general public that don't know what those colours mean, I can explain to them what the transgender flag is and how that they've used baby blue, baby pink, and white colours, which seems to me like it's definitely aimed at children.
Children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, for a bit of knowledge here, the person that designed that flag, his original name was Robert Hogg. He goes by the name now of Monica F. Helms. Okay, and he was in the United States Navy, and he had an aversion to wearing his mother's underwear, and he used to sneak into the laundry rooms in the Navy on the ships and wear women's underwear, and he identifies as being trans. Is yeah.
They've all got this is another thing as well. They've all got these dark sexual fetishes in their
Yes.
background. The leading players in this, they all have that in common. There's things in their documents like child plus adult equals okay, and so they all have some kind of role to play, which is not what you would see in the staff room of the fire service.
Yeah.
But you're dealing with policies and ideas brought in by people who think and behave that way, and we have to see it as normal, and we have to change our culture because of it. I think if people truly understood the depths of this, they would be absolutely sickened. Like when we first started, we had a strict rule. For the first 18 months, we did not mention LGBT. We did not mention it.
Right.
We were going after the sexual from birth, Alfred Kinsey,
Mm.
and obviously that was the research for homosexuality anyway. So we waited 18 months. And by this, because we were watching LGBT Alliance and some other organization, they were ripping each other apart on social media. And I was like, we don't get involved in that. We stay out here. We focus on the sexual from birth part. And then after that 18 months came, we had lots. We got so much gay support. It is unbelievable,
Mm.
okay? It is unbelievable. And our policy and funding exec is a gay guy as well. We get loads of support. And now I'm in a situation where I can say, well, do you know where it's come from? Are you really queer? Are you really identifying as queer? And so we're in a position now where we've already got the support, that we are now strong. And like I've said to ITV News once, you will not report on us because when your camera comes into our crowd, you don't know if it's a Christian or a lesbian. And that's a problem. That is a problem. But I think if we had started on the LGBT front we wouldn't have got as far as we had, you know. There was absolutely no way we were going to debate the lie. We were just exposing the truth. So what kind of response do you get from the public, Steve? And
Oh,
John, you can chip in on this as well, John, because Joan likes to put herself in some situations. Joan's verbally assaulted quite a lot. And I have to laugh, not because I think it's funny she's been verbally assaulted, but her bravery is just absolutely ridiculous. She puts herself in these situations like Bangor Market, for example, you know, next to the university, and she'll walk straight towards a crowd of 10,000
great.
supporters for different things. So I think Joan would be good to engage you on this. But you tell us what what kind of response you get from the public, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So when I first started doing this, I didn't really know what to expect, and it wasn't long until I realized how deeply entrenched the ideology was within people that walk amongst us.
Right.
And not only was it so deeply entrenched, any any pushback, or how can I best put this? Um, any kind of step away from what they believe and any contra argument to what they believe was met with absolute fury. So they live within this echo chamber, I'm sure, of where everybody affirms what they're doing. But I'm saying the complete opposite. I'm going, for the most part, 95% of the time, I'm on my own, standing there with a message which is opposing this ideology, which is so deeply entrenched. And they get absolutely furious with me. You know, the amount of verbal abuse, the gestures, you know, I'm gonna do it like this with fingers up. But a lot of these people have never been told no as well. So it triggers them so much. But not only verbal abuse, I have also encountered physical abuse of them as well. So that's the people that are pushing this ideology and have signed up to it. But I also get so much, which really encouraging. I get so much positivity from the general public as well. But I don't show that as much on my channel because a lot of them say to me, please don't advertise this, please don't publish this online because I'm worried about losing my job. Because this ideology, I talk about the long march through the institutions all the time. For people that don't know what that is, just a quick explanation. It was a phrase coined by a guy called Rudi Deutschke, who was a student of Antonio Gramsci, who was a Marxist philosopher from Italy. And how do you change society without violence, without how do you completely without a revolution, how do you change it? You do it slowly over time by infiltrating the institutions, and the institutions like education first, and obviously that's what you guys talk about in primary school, but it's in the universities. The lecturers in universities are captured. These people go into organisations and then they write the policies. They go into the police force, they go into the courts, they go into the councils, they get into the fire service, as we've spoken about. So yeah, so this ideology is there, and all these people that I encounter on the streets have been brought up with the ideology. Okay, everybody around them's talking about it, but I think deep down, they know that they're playing let's pretend, because
Yeah.
let's face it, you know, something so there's nothing so obvious, there's nothing so natural as male and female, okay, and that's innate and it cannot be changed, and they know that deep down, but they've taken a position on it. This is the difference. They don't believe it, but they've adopted a position on it, and they will defend that position to the death. Okay, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that you are completely wrong. It's stupid, and sometimes, I have a bit of fun with it now because I'm used to the same arguments when I'm out on the streets. I know what's coming up. I know the counter arguments. And I've never been like a top debater or anything like that, but you don't need to be to
No.
debate complete falsehood. You just got to stick to the truth and the facts and just know a few basic rules and arguments about debating, and let them speak. As Chris Elston said to me, let them speak. And the more that they speak, the more that they're going to make themselves stupid. I would say any advocate of this, that's in a position of power, that's pushing this, give them your platform to speak. A lot of the
Yeah.
time is they'll say, if you've got an enemy, don't give them a platform. They're into cancel culture. They don't want us to speak. I say the opposite. Let them speak, because it just shows how absurd they are. I mean, for example, I'm not a particular fan of Piers Morgan, but he had Zach Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, on his show.
The Titty
I think
Whisperer.
a day, yeah, the Titty Whisperer, and just like, they're not even ashamed to say it now. Before, it was almost like a gotcha moment, like,
Yeah.
can a woman have a penis? And if they'd say yes, like the leader of the Lib Dems did, Ed Davey, he said when he was asked by Nick Ferrari on LBC, can a woman have a penis? Eventually he said, well, quite clearly, yes. Zach Polanski was on Piers Morgan literally just a day or two ago, and he wasn't even ashamed to say it. He says, you obviously, and here's the thing, of course a woman can have a penis, and you don't understand the science, he was saying. I mean, what crazy world we're living in, that these puppet politicians, who of course have taken a position, they know they don't believe it, they've taken a position on it, and they'll push it, and they're not ashamed. And it just shows how crazy the world is.
Can I get
Thing
a
is, go on,
can
sorry,
I
Tone.
comment, please? Yeah, I'm sorry. Hang on.
Oh, she's disappeared now.
Yep.
Well, this is it. They just come out with this absolute nonsense.
Well,
And
what I was going to say is that there are so many people in on this that it's unbelievable. You've got you've got scientists that are rewriting science by now and taking it all seriously.
Yeah.
And they're doing papers on transgender brains and transgender archaeology, etc. I mean, it's all gone absolutely bizarre and ridiculous. And one of the things that I think is a very good argument of yours, although people don't appreciate it, is the fact that you are talking. You are saying that you cannot. It's absolutely impossible to define a transgender person without using the word gender.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a linguist.
Right.
I started learning Latin and French in the 60s when I was in grammar school. Then I went on to study Spanish and Portuguese in London University, one of the colleges there, in 1969. Guess what, Steve? What do you think the word gender meant then?
Male or female, I would imagine.
It was grammatical. It was just a grammatical application. It could mean female or female, but nouns, for example, table, window, chair, woman. If it was a noun for a woman or a female, not necessarily even a female part, because genitalia can even be the opposite in gender. So a woman, and a man can have masculine genitalia. It's nothing to do with actual sex as such. It's to do with the way a language is structured.
Right.
And that's all it is. Might be masculine, might be feminine. Full stop. But they've taken this word and they've used it like a piece of chewing gum. They've done what they wanted to do it, and they took the least popular definition of the word gender and exploded it.
Yeah, it's become, because
Absolutely exploded it. It was all about grammar. It was nothing to do with the general population. And that is what they've done. And it was a big, big mission. But somehow they've succeeded.
yeah, and they've conflated the two. They say gender and sex are completely different, and then they use gender to cross sex-based boundaries. I say this all the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sex is based in, it's natural, it's based in biology. Gender, they tell us now it's a social construct, and because that's their firm belief, then you can be whatever that social construct is, and you can be that, and that's the whole, I think the whole cusp of their argument about gender ideology is that gender is something that's constructed and it's within the mind, and you can adopt that, and that then becomes you, and that then overrides anything biological. Yeah.
That's
So they tell us it's something different, and but they then use it to cross the biological boundaries, the sex divided boundaries. And this is where obviously it's so harmful to women,
Yeah.
because we accept that men, as we've talked about earlier, men and women aren't equal. They're different. Of
No.
course, you get your outliers. You know, there's some, I think in the fire service, there was probably, of all the women that I'd worked with, probably, there's definitely one, probably two, which were really up for the job. They were really good, and I would happily run into a burning building with those two. But they were outliers. There was a lot that it'd be like, you know, they just, for me, they didn't cut it. But that said as well, there was a lot of men that weren't that good at the job as well. Or there were some. There were some. But so you always have outliers. But, you know, in general, men are stronger, they are fitter, they're faster in general.
I absolutely agree.
And more dangerous. And this is where this is why women need their sex divided boundaries, because most violence comes from men. Most violence is men on men violence, but when it's across the sexes, it's predominantly very high in the 90s of male to female violence.
and you've got a whole bag full of proof, haven't you, from trans crimes?
Yes.
All the lovely ladies that have done all sorts of naughty things, and people don't want to admit that these people actually exist.
No, I know.
When I start to give examples out on the streets, people that are arguing with me, as soon as I get to the details and I've got a few imprinted on in my brain, they just don't want to know. They're always wanting to change. It's something that never happens. In fact, just this morning, I saw an article where a trans woman, and for everybody who doesn't understand the language, a trans woman is a man pretending to be a woman, and we have these men in female prisons. He's in Scotland. He's got a woman pregnant in a Scottish prison.
I'd like to say something on the prison front, because I was in youth offenders back in 2001, and so I was segregated from the main population anyway. They've only got youth offenders on one wing. And there was a trans person in the main prison. Now, we were only youngsters, and we hadn't really seen anything like this before, so we called them shim. You know, what youngsters are like, right?
like
So, but we only ever saw them on their own in the exercise yard. So even though there was a transgender within the prison, they were never, ever, ever near another female. Never near another female. I don't know what the reason for that was, but there was never, the way the prison was set up, we were never in any kind of danger. But I know things have changed dramatically since then. And I can openly say this here about my experience, because I know there's going to be people watching this who were there at the time, so they can always verify what I've said. I'll never say something I haven't got a witness for or a document to back up. But I can say 100% there was never any risk to a female prisoner because
Right.
that transgender person was not allowed anywhere near us. And now I know that's all changed. And also, I want to say this as well about the risk assessment. I don't think people realize this. So when a prisoner has a risk assessment in prison, the risk assessment is on them. It's not the risk assessment on other people. So
Right.
when you've got a female pretending to be male, the chances of finding a female to male in a male in prison is very slim because the risk to them is very high. But when you put in the male to female into a female prison, the risk assessment on them is low. So that's why they go in. So the way they do the risk assessments are backwards.
Right, okay.
You
Yeah,
should be measuring risk from that person to the rest of the population, but the risk is measured on that person. And I don't want to say there's no male to females in male prisons. I wouldn't know. But I know how they do the risk assessments, and I know why there are far more men in women's prisons than there are women in men's. I don't know the figure at all, but I do know that's how they do the risk assessment. So if you're looking back, that was 2001. I was 18. It's 2026 now, 25 years ago. Look at the shift in that time.
Yeah.
Look at the shift in that time. Like you said, we have females getting impregnated by transgender females.
Yeah, one of the famous cases, what I often recite when I'm out on the streets, because I can remember it when I was doing my research, this was the first one that come up. There was a guy who was a double rapist. He was called Stephen Wood. When he was convicted, he identified as a female, called himself Karen White, and he was put in, I think it was Wakefield Prison, and he sexually assaulted 2 female inmates in the prison. And because of this thing called, I think, the Bench Guidebook, which was a guide for judges on how to treat people, the judge said that the court had to use his preferred pronouns, which was female, and the court transcripts read, "She assaulted her with her penis."
Wow.
Yeah, so there you go.
But I tell you what I also find interesting. So there's no such thing as a rape charge for women in the UK, right? No such thing as a rape charge for women. So the statistics should be 0. And the reason why the rape charge for women don't exist is because of the penis and penetration. Okay, so that it's not fair. It's not fair legislation, but it does have its benefits because I think since 2012 we are seeing an increase in female rapists. Now, a female can only be done with a serious sexual assault in a situation of rape. They can never get done for rape itself. So we know these women who have been done for rape have penises.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. So that law now does have its benefits now. There's no arguing with those statistics. Every single woman that's been charged with rape
was a man.
Has a penis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is absolutely skewering now the statistics of female violence to males, but it's literally, it's male to male violence or male to female. But it's just saying there's been an increase in female violent assaults or sexual assaults. Absolutely. Just if I can get these figures from the top of my head now, when you look at the statistics of people in prison for sexual assaults. So for females, it's, I think, 3%. Now that might be skewed because some of that 3%, some of them will be male. Okay.
Yeah.
For males, it's less than 20%. I think it's about 19% of males that are in prison are in for sexual assaults. Of trans women, so that's obviously we know it's men identifying as women, it's 60% are in for sexual offences. So read into that what you will. But we're going back to...
I've got them paedophilic as well.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure what the offences that they were in for, but they were all sexual offences, 60%, you know. So that's almost 2/3.
Yeah. With this is something else we're gonna have to look into as well. I was
Yeah.
contacted by someone a while back, and I need to chase this up actually. They were looking at the DBS. So for people who don't
Yeah.
know what the DBS is,
Yeah.
disclosure and barring service, it's apparently a safeguarding tool. It's not. Um, but there was an option on the DBS website to either click this button or call this number if you identify as a different gender. But that's something I really wanted to get onto. I never got around to it. Maybe I'll do it. So might call them today now before this goes out and see what the process is. But it's that easy to get a DBS in a completely different name just by saying you identify as the opposite sex.
Yeah.
You know, this is dangerous.
Yeah, one of the reasons a lot of these men identify as being trans is because they can get away from their past history, you know, and particularly in Ireland, they can self-ID. Fortunately, we don't have self-ID in this country, but we still have the Gender Recognition Act. Do you want me to talk about that a little bit for people that don't know? So, I mean, it's like, what were these politicians thinking? What did they think would happen if they introduced this law? Were they, I mean, and it was pushed by, I believe, the European Commission, and this is where we're going into this gender ideology being a global agenda, a top-down global agenda and conspiratorial. They passed the Gender Recognition Act, which, and there's a conflation within this over sex and gender. So if you go through a certain procedures, things like living as a woman for a year or 2 years and being signed off by 2 doctors, and you pay a small fee, you can change your gender, which then allows you to legally change your sex. So can you see the play on words, gender and sex? So it's called the Gender Recognition Act, which enables you to change your sex on your birth certificate legally. So this is where the Supreme Court ruling came in, because men were going into women's toilets and they were saying, but I'm not a man, I'm a woman. And look, under law of this land, I've got my birth certificate which says female, so I'm legally a female. So it's a legal fiction, so I can go into that female space. So this is why the Equality Act 2010, the Supreme Court ruling, had to define what female meant. So now in this country, we have a legal female and a biological female, and that's all down to the Gender Recognition Act 2004.
And this is it, you know, it's dangerous. We're dealing with dangerous stuff here.
Yep.
But I wanted to ask you, parents, what kind of response do you get from parents on the street? Do you get many people saying their children are going through this, or?
Do you know what? It's very varied, which makes it, in my eyes, quite disturbing. I do see some families coming along with young kids and they're saying, thank you, well done, you know, and a lot of them do talk about, like, I'm worried about what they're going to be teaching my child in school, or I'm thinking about homeschooling. And then you get these other woke parents, sometimes often holding the child in the hand, or the child's running round, and they're arguing against me that, you know, that, oh, well, they're arguing against the agenda, basically. And then I will say to them, well, when your child grows up, would you be happy for little Johnny there to identify as little Julie and then go through this I don't want to use their language, gender affirming care is sex rejecting harm, or sex denying harm. But what they will say is, well, if it makes them happy, I'll support them all the way. Because I don't think they've thought about it too much. No. They've adopted that position, as I said before, and they will not back down from that. But would they really allow their child to do that when it comes down to it? I know some would, because you've got Susie Green from Mermaids that took her young son to Thailand when he was 16, you know, to be castrated.
Yeah.
Do you know what I find really sad out on the streets? And it took me a while to work out what was going on. There were women coming up to me who were of the age of grandparents, and they would come up to me and then start shouting, screaming at me, you know, saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. And then one of them said to me, I've got a trans grandchild. And then it clicked, because it had happened a lot, many times before, but they never said that. So what's happened in that situation is they probably got woke daughter or son who's had a child, and their daughter and son would have come up to them and said, your granddaughter is now your grandson. And if you don't agree with it, then you'll never see them again.
Yeah.
So they will, I mean, a grandma just wants to see the kids.
Yeah.
Doesn't she? Granddad just wants, and they'll do anything for those kids, you know, even if it means lying to themselves. And because I'm standing there with that sign saying there's no such thing as a transgender child, they know that I'm speaking the truth. But they've been, you know, on threat of never seeing their grandchild again. They've had to adopt that position.
Accept it.
And they've had to accept it. And I think that's so sad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. No, do you know what, Steve? I was in a very small charity shop a few months back, and I would say there were about 4 customers in there, including me, and we were all women. And I got into conversation, I can't remember how, to do with maybe, I think I plunged in with the trans bit, somehow or other, whatever the context. And it turned out that there were 2 grandmothers there who had a trans child in the family. And there was also a woman who had a brother that was going down that road. And I thought, what are the odds? Come on.
Yeah.
Tiny little shop in a tiny little town. How big is this? You know?
And it's
And these ladies, obviously, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings because you're talking about family here and love. And it's a very hard, sensitive barrier, isn't it? But they're not really open to, once it's happened in your family, I think that that's it. It's game over. You're going to support that child, whatever.
Yeah, I come across this concept of soft and hard virtues, and empathy and kindness and love. They're all the soft virtues. They're easy, but there are harder virtues, but what I believe are more righteous virtues, and that's truth and honesty and integrity. And they're hard because you might have to tell somebody they're wrong. And the truth, this is why I do what I do. The truth matters.
Absolutely.
You know, without truth, without freedom, without honesty, you know, you can't run a democracy. We without the freedom to express the truth, the objective truth, then we have a dictatorship. And that's ultimately what drives me. That's the skin I've got in the game primarily, because I'm not a child and I'm not a woman. So that's primarily, if I'm honest, and I've had to look at why I do what I do. That's the skin that I've got in the game. I don't want to live in a dictatorship where we can't speak the truth. But the other skin in the game, I've got a wife, I've got Sue, and she's the same size as you, Kim. She's like 5 foot as well, you know, so she's only dinky. I don't want Sue having to go into a female space where she's uncomfortable. I mean, she's a little terrier. She doesn't take any nonsense. But so I've got that skin in the game as well, you know. So if we can't express our freedom of speech, then it leads us down a dystopian path.
100%. And there are people losing jobs over it.
Well,
no one feels free to speak out. It's tyrannical, absolutely tyrannical. And Steve, can I just ask you one thing?
yeah.
I personally think this is just part of a bigger agenda. That these children are being used at the moment. And they're just handy to push an agenda on. Now, I personally think that we're being warmed up. We're warmed up by language all the time. You know, we see it in our everyday lives. I've experienced for 70 odd years. I'm aware of how important language is. Like, for example, mastectomies are no longer sort of painful procedures that a lot of women need therapy for afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, it's like this, disgusting books like this. Can I tell you about gender diversity, which is in libraries, school libraries as well, and which is a book that's actually been pushed for children on the curriculum. In there, you've got a little 12-year-old girl who's going to the Tavistock or wherever. She's meeting her friends there, and she's saying she doesn't know whether she's going to have top surgery or not. This is chilling. What they're doing to the children, that kind of disgusting indoctrination to make something that is painful forever, irreversible, to have such glib language about it in a school book is beyond words to me. It's evil.
Yeah.
So, but I think this is going somewhere else. And for example, when you look at Martin Rothblatt, you look at, was it Jennifer Pritzker, these people, and also the globalists that are supporting this. So, you know, it isn't just one or two weirdos. I mean, Martin Rothblatt is a very, very wealthy and he was so sorry.
I was going to pick you up on that. It's so easy though, isn't it?
Butch, who was in tow with the man from Manchester University during the Yogyakarta principles, which people have never heard of, but it doesn't matter. This was part of the move towards where we are today. So you've got, what's his name? Stephen Whittle. What's her name, rather, in Manchester Metropolitan University? You've got Martin Rothblatt that was actually working with her.
Right.
So, you know, this is huge tentacles here. And you're talking about business, you're talking about Google, all of them. They all seem to be behind this. Now, why would that be? I personally think we're going into the land of neural chips or whatever. We're talking about transhumanism eventually.
Well, Martin Rothblatt, formerly Martin Rothblatt, did write a book. I've purchased the book. I just haven't had time to read it. It's called From Transgender to Transhumanism. And he's heavily invested as well in technopharma, technological pharmaceuticals, and he's got the biggest pig farm, you know, so he's actually breeding pigs for transplants of organs into humans as well. So yeah, it really does run deep. It's very difficult to actually pinpoint it, but you get this feeling that there is a global conspiracy from all different angles, you know, trying to control humanity. For me, ultimately, it's a control agenda, and it's also a depopulation agenda. The more people that are identifying out of their natal sex, the less that they're going to be breeding. So that is part of it. It's also part of disrupting society. You're very right there. It's social engineering. Okay, we're arguing against each other. I see people so much behind me and so much against me when I'm out on the streets. So it's dividing society. It's getting us arguing with each other. And ultimately, I think they're trying to push us towards some kind of civil unrest. And this is just one part of that. So they've got this civil unrest, and then they can come in with some kind of martial law, or they can come in with some kind of digital ID program where everybody has to have this digital ID, and if you step out of line and become a dissident, a bit like we are, then they can just literally turn you off from society. So it gets people to conform. And ultimately, I believe they want this one world government. A lot of this is coming from the people behind the United Nations, the people behind the Bretton Woods Institutes. And if people don't know what they are, the Bretton Woods Institutes are like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. So the IMF, the World Bank, it used to be GATT, the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs. Now it's the World Trade Organization. These were institutions that were formed in the wake of the Second World War, including the United Nations. These are the people that are controlling the banking, that control the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that are pushing all this agenda. So you see how it's all linked. And now you've got the moratorium of understanding between the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, which come just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, for me, okay, there was the only place that there was a pandemic was on your TV screens and on your social media, on the internet. I'm not saying that there wasn't anything going round where people were getting ill, because I got ill during it, you know, but I've had flus before, you know, we're going down the conspiratorial route, slightly different, but the same people, I believe, that were behind this, that were behind, you know, the COVID, in my eyes, fake pandemic, are the same people that are pushing this agenda. And their ultimate goal is digital IDs for everybody, okay, and a one world government and a depopulated planet. So yeah, there's conspiracy, Steve. But I can I'll say this because you can back it up with evidence.
Yeah.
And
that's it, isn't it? You know, this is all evidence based, and if people actually looked at where this stuff comes from, they would be absolutely mortified. And that, you know, that's why we carry evidence with us mostly everywhere we go. You know, this is why we can't back down. If this was a debatable issue, fair enough, but it's not a debatable issue. You know, the facts are there. And we actually proved in court that this has come from the United Nations and the World Health Organization. But you wouldn't hear about that because the media buried it. But, you know, this is, you know, devolution, again, it's just an illusion. And that was the biggest part of our fight. The hardest part of all was convincing people, or proving to people that this wasn't a Welsh Government thing, that this was above them. And, you know, we even had the politicians denying it, but admitting it in the same sentence. And we were like, why aren't people reading this stuff, you know? But this is why we can't give up. We know it's real. We know it's damaging, and we know it's harmful. And we are always absolutely delighted when we do come across brave people like you, Steve, because it's not it's not an easy role. We get verbal assaults mostly from teachers or serving county councillors. Everyone else seems to be fine. You know, but at the end of the day, the shame is on them. The shame is on them, because the evidence speaks for themselves. Even if they genuinely believe this is good, the fact that they're not looking into it, that's just negligence in my eyes. You know, at this stage of the game now, if you haven't properly looked into this stuff, you're negligent. There's no two ways about that. Let's not dress it up, okay? You got to sympathize for families that's going through it and families that believe in it. But the truth is this: the irreversible trans regret is real. It is real. If you're not doing your homework now, it is a form of negligence. And we can't deny that. You know, we cannot deny that. There are, like I said, there's some families out there who have been completely hoodwinked. Would you rather a dead daughter or a live son? You know, they do. You know, some families have been hoodwinked. But the families who have been told, look, this is not right, you've got to look into it, then do you know what? It's on their head. It is on their head, you know? Because if we wanted to buy a new car seat for the car or a new washing machine, we would look at the reviews. We would be mostly reading the bad reviews.
Bad reviews, You
know, but what we got is cognitive dissonance. People are looking at good reviews And these ain't even long-term good reviews. They ain't long-term good reviews. They, again, like you said earlier, people just want their children to be happy. What is happiness? Is happiness having a smile today? Or is happiness being a wholesome human being in 10 years' time? We're being told so much that love is love, and as long people are happy. Well, a heroin addict is happy when they've just had a hit. So are we just going to go around dishing it out to people, say happy for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
No, we're not going to do it. And that's why it's really important that people like you, Steve, I'm grateful for you. I am. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
If I
I'm grateful
could,
for you guys.
if I had the time, I would. I'm better off out on the streets. But we just don't have the time because we're too busy dealing with
Yeah.
parents on a day-to-day basis. But it is an absolute relief when I do see people like you. And in actual fact, Billboard Chris popped to our last demo, Parliament Square. He was actually in the UK. So he popped by for 2 minutes. So we do have a couple of pictures with his boards. And that's what I always describe you as to people. So I'm so glad you mentioned Billboard Chris, because that's what I describe you as the UK Billboard Chris. But I just want to say, I don't know if anybody has anything particular they want to say now, or if you're happy to close it down, because I want to inform people of our conference, and you are coming to attend.
Yes.
So
I'm looking
unless
forward
you've
to
got,
it.
yeah, as John, have you got anything you want to say before we move on to that, love?
The only thing that I would say is how, if people are concerned and they want to fight this, what I would say is I'm trying to raise awareness amongst the population of the harms of this. People need to speak about it. Don't be silent. Don't do anything that's going to jeopardize your employment, because as we say, it's within the institutions. The HR people will happily sack you because they've been ideologically captured. But amongst trusted friends and colleagues, speak about it more, form alliances, research about the harms, and subtly make it normal to talk about it, because this agenda does not want you to speak about it. So find your voice. That's my message. Find your voice.
Yeah, find your voice. And I want to add to that as well. If you are concerned, you want to speak out, but you feel you can't speak out, you can get in touch with anyone here on this podcast now. As long as we have evidence of something, so if somebody brings along a policy, then this information can still get out there. You don't have to expose yourselves. As long as we have the evidence that something happened, and the way I look at it is, if I can defend it in a court of law, give it here, I'm going to publicize it. If I can't defend it in a court of law, I simply can't. So if you don't have the confidence to speak up, but you feel there's information you really want the public to get their hands on, then just contact us, because we can help with that, Steve.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just going to shut this window because the gardener's in. Sorry.
No problem at all. So yeah, guys, so before we wrap this up then, I just want to say that we do have our conference on Saturday, the 18th of April. Steve is joining us at the conference. Unfortunately, Steve's not going to be speaking at the event. He's going to be a guest. He's going to be doing a bit of filming, because we're flying people from all across the world to be here in Wales. And then we'll be on Parliament Square on Monday the 20th, where we will be launching a piece of legislation that actually targets this education at the source, and that's the universities. So lots to look forward to, guys. If you're a big fan of Steve's, please come along, and I'm pretty sure Steve will be happy to do some photo ops as well. With you bringing your boards along, Steve?
I will do if you want me
Brilliant.
to.
Yes, please, we
Okay.
do.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Thank
so
you so
thank
much
you
for
all
having
so
me.
much for. Oh, sorry. So thank you all so much for watching. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. And Joan, thank you for setting this up. And guys, if we don't see you on the weekend, we'll be seeing you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.